May 1943. 15,000 feet above the Coral Sea, Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell watched the morning sun glint off the wings of his squadron as they cruised toward their patrol sector. The sky stretched endless and blue, the ocean below a sheet of rippled silver. Everything seemed peaceful, almost serene. His gunners sat relaxed at their stations, confident in their training and the reliability of their weapons. They had no idea that within 6 months, everything they knew about aerial combat would be completely transformed by an innovation so simple yet so devastating that it would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Pacific skies. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Mitchell and thousands of other American air crews were about to witness was not just a technological upgrade, but a psychological revolution that would turn the defensive vulnerability of bomber formations into offensive firepower so overwhelming that it would rewrite tactical doctrine and save countless lives. The problem had been apparent since the first encounters over the Pacific. American bombers, particularly the B-25 Mitchell medium bombers and the A-20 Havoc attack aircraft, carried defensive armament designed for European theater combat. The standard configuration featured 50-caliber machine guns in flexible mounts, turrets positioned to cover various angles of approach. The concept was sound in theory. Crew members would spot incoming aircraft and engage them with sustained, accurate fire. But the Pacific conflict was different. The distances were vast. The targets often ships or ground installations requiring low-altitude approaches. And the opposition was fierce. Japanese fighter pilots, flying the nimble Zero and Oscar fighters, had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses of American bomber formations. They would approach from angles where defensive fire was weakest, particularly head-on, where bombers had minimal forward firing capability. Captain Paul Gunn understood this problem better than most. An experienced pilot who had flown in the Philippines before the outbreak of hostilities, Gunn had witnessed firsthand the devastating effectiveness of Japanese fighter tactics. By early 1943, he was serving with the 5th Air Force in Australia, part of General George Kenny's command. Kenny, one of the most innovative air commanders of the era, encouraged creative solutions to tactical problems. Gunn had been thinking about the problem for months. He would lie awake at night in his quarters near Port Moresby, listening to the rain hammer against the corrugated metal roof, sketching designs on whatever paper he could find. The question that consumed him was simple but profound. What if bombers could fight back with the same concentrated firepower they faced? The answer came to him not as a flash of inspiration, but as a gradual accumulation of observations. He noticed how Japanese fighters would break off their attacks when faced with sustained forward fire from even a single weapon. He studied combat reports, noting the angles of approach, the split-second timing that gave fighters their advantage, and he realized something that seemed almost too obvious. If you could mount multiple weapons firing forward, synchronized to create a cone of fire that no aircraft could penetrate, you would transform a vulnerable bomber into a formidable attacker. But the real genius was in the implementation. Rather than designing new mounts or complex systems, Gunn proposed something radical in its simplicity. Remove the bombing equipment from the nose of the aircraft and replace it with guns. Lots of guns. Fixed guns that the pilot could aim by pointing the entire aircraft at the target. In essence, turn the bomber into the largest fighter aircraft ever conceived. Major John Hennebrey, another pilot in the 5th Air Force, immediately grasped the potential. Then Hennebrey said, his voice tight with excitement as he examined Gunn's sketches, "This could change everything we know about ground attack missions. If we can bring this kind of firepower to bear, we will not just be defending ourselves, we will be the aggressors." The first experimental conversion began in March 1943 at a maintenance depot in Townsville, Australia. The aircraft selected was a B-25 Mitchell, serial number 41-30263, pulled from regular service for modification. The work was painstaking, requiring engineers to completely redesign the nose section of the aircraft. Sergeant Robert Chen, a maintenance technician who worked on the conversion, later described the process in a letter to his family. We started by removing everything from the nose, Chen wrote. The bombardier's position, the Norden bomb site, all the equipment that made it a bomber. Then we built a new structure reinforced to handle the recoil. We mounted 4 50-caliber machine guns, then added 4 more. By the time we were done, that nose section looked like something from a science fiction story. 8 50-caliber Brownings, all fixed to fire forward, all controlled by the pilot's trigger. But they did not stop there. The team added 2 more 50-caliber guns in blisters on each side of the fuselage, giving the pilot 10 forward-firing weapons. The combined rate of fire was approximately 80 rounds per second. The weight of fire, the actual mass of lead that could be thrown at a target in 60 seconds, exceeded 400 pounds. When Mitchell, the original squadron leader, first saw the modified aircraft, his reaction was one of disbelief. "That thing looks like it wants to eat the sky," Mitchell observed, walking slowly around the bomber. "Can it even fly with all that weight in the nose?" The test flight answered that question. While the center of gravity had shifted forward, requiring ballast in the tail section, the aircraft remained controllable. More importantly, the ground tests of the weapons system revealed something extraordinary. When all 10 guns fired simultaneously, the noise was physically intense, a sound that seemed to tear the air apart. The recoil distributed through the airframe was manageable, and the effect on targets was devastating. The first combat test came on April 5, 1943. The target was a Japanese convoy moving along the coast of New Guinea, a group of transport vessels escorted by destroyers. Standard bombing runs had proven ineffective against such targets. Ships could maneuver to avoid bombs, and the low-altitude runs required for accuracy exposed bombers to intense anti-aircraft fire. Captain Jack Abel piloted the modified B-25, call sign Ghost Rider. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Thomas Wade, sat in the right seat, managing engine power and watching for enemy fighters. Behind them, the rest of the crew manned defensive positions. But they all knew the real firepower pointed forward. The approach was made at wave-top height, the bomber skimming so low that spray occasionally flicked against the windscreen. Japanese lookouts on the lead transport never saw the attack coming. Abel lined up the shot with the same precision he had once used for bombing runs. But this time he did not need to worry about release points or bomb trajectories. He simply pointed the nose at the target and pressed the trigger. What happened next was described in multiple after-action reports, each using slightly different language, but conveying the same sense of overwhelming effectiveness. The concentrated fire from 10 50-caliber machine guns struck the transport's bridge and superstructure, like a horizontal rain of steel. Metal shredded, glass shattered, the wooden deck splintered under the impact. The firing run lasted approximately 4 seconds. In that time, Ghost Rider expended more than 300 rounds of ammunition. Wade, watching from the co-pilot seat, could barely process what he was seeing. Then Wade said into the intercom, his voice stunned, "We just rendered an entire ship inoperable with machine guns. I did not think that was possible." The transport, severely damaged, began listing almost immediately. Fires spread rapidly through the affected sections. The convoy scattered, but Abel had already selected his next target. The second run was even more effective. The crew had refined their technique, understanding now the awesome power they controlled. By the time Ghost Rider returned to base, the intelligence officers were already receiving reports from coast watchers and reconnaissance aircraft. 3 transports severely damaged, 1 destroyer forced to withdraw with significant topside damage, and most remarkably, 0 aircraft lost in the attack. General Kenny, when briefed on the results, immediately ordered an expansion of the program. Within weeks, every available B-25 in the 5th Air Force was being modified. The configuration evolved with each conversion. Some aircraft received up to 14 forward-firing guns. Others incorporated a 75mm cannon in addition to the machine guns, creating a weapons platform capable of engaging any target from fortifications to warships. But the true impact went beyond the technical specifications. Japanese forces, which had grown accustomed to the patterns of American bomber attacks, suddenly faced an entirely new threat. Transport convoys, once relatively secure with fighter escort and anti-aircraft protection, became extremely vulnerable. Aircraft parked on airfields could be disabled wholesale in seconds. troop concentrations became exposed to attacks of unprecedented ferocity. Ensign Takeshi Yamamoto of the Imperial Japanese Navy survived an attack by the modified bombers in June 1943. His account, discovered in captured documents after the conclusion of hostilities, provides a rare perspective from the receiving end. "We were crossing from Rabaul to Leh," Yamamoto wrote, transporting reinforcements and supplies. "The weather was clear, visibility excellent. We felt confident. Then the American bombers came, but they did not climb to bombing altitude. They stayed low, approaching directly. I thought perhaps they were damaged, attempting a desperate attack. Then they opened fire." Yamamoto described the sound as a continuous roar, like thunder that would not stop. The tracers, he noted, appeared as solid streams of light rather than individual rounds. Within moments, the transport he served on was taking fire that penetrated bulkheads, ignited fuel stores, and rendered the vessel uncontrollable. He survived by abandoning ship immediately, spending 6 hours in the water before rescue. Of the 400 personnel aboard his transport, fewer than 80 made it to shore. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound. Pilots began refusing escort duty for convoys. Commanders rerouted supply lines to avoid areas where the modified bombers operated. Intelligence reports captured later in the conflict revealed that Japanese tactical doctrine was hastily rewritten to address this new threat, but no effective countermeasure was ever developed. Back at American bases, the crews flying the modified aircraft developed a fierce pride in their machines. The bombers received names that reflected their new role: Devastator, Annihilator, Commerce Destroyer. Nose art often depicted stylized representations of the gun clusters, sometimes with exaggerated flames or lightning bolts to emphasize their firepower. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a nurse stationed at an advanced base in New Guinea, witnessed the return of these aircraft after missions. She wrote in her diary about the contrast between the battle-worn appearance of the planes and the almost euphoric mood of the crews. "They would come back with empty ammunition cans stacked waist-high," Chen wrote. "The smell of burnt gunpowder was so strong you could taste it from 50 feet away." But the pilots would be grinning, talking rapidly about what they had seen, what they had accomplished. They knew they had found something that worked, really worked, in a way that gave them an advantage they had never had before. The tactical applications expanded rapidly. The modified bombers began flying what were called commerce destruction missions, hunting Japanese shipping along supply routes. A single aircraft could disrupt an entire convoy. Formations of 4 or 5 could shut down maritime traffic in a region for days. Ground attack missions took on a new character. Japanese airfields, previously difficult targets requiring precision bombing, could now be rendered inoperable in minutes. The concentrated fire would disable aircraft on the ground, damage runway surfaces, and demolish fuel and ammunition storage facilities. After-action analysis showed that a single modified B-25 could inflict as much damage in one low-level pass as an entire squadron of conventional bombers in a traditional raid. Major Richard Cross, an intelligence officer analyzing the effectiveness of the modifications, compiled statistics that revealed the true scope of the transformation. In the 6 months following the introduction of the gun-modified aircraft, Japanese shipping losses in the Southwest Pacific increased by 300%. Aircraft disabled on the ground quadrupled. And most significantly, American bomber losses in low-altitude attacks decreased by 60%. The innovation was not without costs. The intense rate of fire meant that ammunition consumption was enormous. Missions were often limited not by fuel, but by the weight and volume of ammunition that could be carried. Maintenance crews worked around the clock to service the weapons, clear jams, and replace barrels worn out by the extreme heat and stress of sustained fire. Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, an armorer responsible for maintaining the guns on several modified aircraft, described the challenge in practical terms. Then Rodriguez explained to a reporter visiting the base, each gun can fire approximately 800 rounds per minute under ideal conditions. With 10 guns firing, that is 8,000 rounds per minute, or 133 rounds per second. The heat generated is intense enough to warp barrels if firing is sustained too long. We developed procedures, burst fire patterns, cooling sequences. It was a learning process. figuring out how to use this much firepower effectively without destroying our own weapons. By late 1943, the Japanese military command was fully aware of the threat. Intercepted communications revealed orders to avoid engagement with the modified bombers whenever possible. One document, translated after its capture, described the aircraft as flying fortresses of forward fire, noting that conventional interception tactics were ineffective and often dangerous. The innovation also influenced aircraft design and production back in the United States. Manufacturers began incorporating lessons learned from the field modifications into new production models. The B-25G model featured a factory-installed solid nose with multiple forward-firing guns. The A-26 Invader, designed late in the conflict, incorporated even heavier forward armament as a standard feature. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the crews themselves. Pilots who had felt vulnerable, exposed to attack by more maneuverable fighters, now felt empowered. The psychological shift from defensive to offensive posture changed behavior in combat. Crews became more aggressive, taking on targets they would have previously avoided, pressing attacks despite opposition. Captain Mitchell, the squadron leader from the opening scene, flew his first mission in a modified bomber in August 1943. His target was a Japanese supply depot on the coast of New Britain. The approach was made at sunset, the bomber silhouetted against the darkening sky. Then Mitchell lined up the target, saw the buildings and stacked supplies clearly visible, and engaged the weapons. In his after-action report, Mitchell struggled to find words adequate to the experience. "There is no comparison," Mitchell wrote, "between dropping bombs and hoping they hit, and pointing your aircraft at what you want to disable and watching it happen under direct fire. The sense of control, of immediate cause and effect, changes everything about how you approach a mission. You are no longer just trying to survive long enough to deliver your payload, you are hunting." The modifications were not limited to the B-25. A-20 attack aircraft received similar upgrades, as did some B-17 flying fortresses used in the Pacific Theater. Each aircraft type presented unique engineering challenges, but the core concept remained the same. Maximize forward firing capability, transform bombers into heavily armed attack aircraft. Japanese engineers attempted to develop countermeasures. Documents recovered after the conflict revealed designs for increased armor on transport vessels, reinforced structures to withstand machine gun fire, even proposals for escort ships dedicated to anti-aircraft defense against low-altitude attacks. But resources were limited, and the pace of American innovation continually outstripped defensive responses. By early 1944, the modified bombers were being used in roles that would have been unthinkable at the conflict's outset. They flew close air support missions for ground troops, their concentrated firepower able to suppress enemy positions with precision and speed. They conducted anti-shipping strikes that devastated Japanese logistics. They even engaged in air-to-air combat, the sheer volume of forward fire making them formidable opponents despite their size and lack of maneuverability. Lieutenant Commander Robert Hayes, a Navy liaison officer working with Army Air Forces units, observed a mission briefing in March 1944. He later described the casual confidence of the crews, the matter-of-fact way they discussed tactics that relied on overwhelming firepower. Then Hayes noted in his official report, "These crews have developed a doctrine that is fundamentally different from traditional bomber operations. They think of themselves as attack pilots first, bomber crews second." The aircraft modifications have enabled a psychological transformation as significant as the tactical one. The human cost of the Pacific conflict remained severe, but the innovation unquestionably saved lives. Missions that would have required large formations exposing dozens of aircraft to enemy fire could now be accomplished by smaller groups flying the modified bombers. The reduction in losses, both aircraft and personnel, was measurable and significant. As the conflict progressed toward its conclusion, the modified bombers became icons of American air power in the Pacific. Newsreel footage showed them in action, the distinctive nose clusters of guns unmistakable. Correspondents wrote articles describing missions flown by these aircraft, often emphasizing the innovative American approach to solving tactical problems through ingenuity rather than simply throwing more resources at a challenge. In the final months before the conflict's end, the modified bombers participated in the largest operations. They supported amphibious landings, interdicted supply lines, and conducted strikes deep into areas under Japanese control. Their effectiveness never diminished. If anything, as crews became more experienced and tactics more refined, they became even more formidable. The conclusion of hostilities in August 1945 brought an end to combat operations, but the lessons learned from the gun-modified bombers influenced military aviation for decades. The concept of concentrating firepower, of transforming defensive weapons into offensive tools, became a standard consideration in aircraft design. The psychological impact of overwhelming firepower, the way it affected both those who wielded it and those who faced it, was studied and incorporated into tactical doctrine. Captain Gunn, the innovator whose vision had initiated the entire program, survived the conflict and continued serving in various capacities. He seldom spoke publicly about the modifications, preferring to let the results speak for themselves. In a rare interview conducted years later, Gunn was asked what he considered his greatest contribution. His answer was characteristically modest. Then Gunn replied after a long pause, "I just tried to give our crews a fighting chance. Everything else followed from that." The modified aircraft themselves, those that survived the conflict, were eventually retired from service. Some were scrapped, their valuable metals reclaimed. Others were preserved in museums, silent testament to innovation born of necessity. The gun clusters were often removed, the aircraft restored to their original bombing configurations, or displayed with inert weapons. But the impact they had made was permanent, written in the tactical manuals, the victory records, and the memories of those who flew them and those who faced them. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, the armorer, was among the last to work on the modified bombers before their retirement. She described the experience of decommissioning the weapons as bittersweet. "These guns saved countless lives," Rodriguez said years later. "They gave us an advantage when we desperately needed one. Removing them felt like closing a chapter, but also like honoring what they had accomplished. We kept records of every mission, every round fired, every target engaged. The numbers were staggering, but behind every number was a story of a crew that came home, a mission that succeeded, a turning point in an encounter that might have gone differently." The legacy of the innovation extended beyond the immediate tactical advantages. It demonstrated the value of adaptability, of questioning established doctrine when reality demanded new solutions. It showed how relatively simple modifications, when applied creatively to existing equipment, could produce revolutionary results. And it illustrated the crucial importance of empowering people at all levels to propose and implement improvements rather than waiting for solutions to come from distant headquarters or manufacturing centers. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, who had begun the conflict uncertain and vulnerable, ended it as one of the most experienced attack pilots in the Pacific Theater. He flew 73 missions in modified bombers, participated in operations from New Guinea to the Philippines, and trained dozens of pilots in the tactics developed through hard experience. In his final flight log entry, made on the day hostilities ended, Mitchell wrote a single sentence that captured perhaps the most profound truth of the entire experience. "We learned that survival comes not from avoiding the fight, but from ensuring that when the fight comes, you are the most dangerous thing in the sky." The innovation that had begun with sketches on scraps of paper, born from the frustration of watching crews face impossible odds, had grown into a program that fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Pacific Air Campaign. The gun-modified bombers did not win the conflict alone. Victory required the combined efforts of millions of people across all services and all theaters. But they represented something essential about the American approach to challenges, the willingness to innovate, to experiment, to throw out the rulebook when the rulebook was not working, and to trust that ingenuity, combined with determination, could overcome any obstacle. The aircrews who flew these aircraft, the maintenance personnel who kept them operational, the engineers who refined the modifications, and the commanders who supported the program all contributed to a success that rippled through every aspect of the Pacific Campaign. They proved that sometimes the most effective weapon is not the newest technology or the most expensive equipment, but simply a good idea, properly implemented by people who understand what is at stake and refuse to accept defeat. The statistical legacy tells part of the story. Thousands of targets disabled, hundreds of aircraft saved, countless lives preserved. But the human legacy is equally important. The confidence instilled in crews who flew into danger, knowing they had the tools to fight back effectively. The relief of commanders who no longer had to send people on missions that were likely to fail. The hope that spread through entire units when word came that a new capability was available that would make their job survivable. In the end, what began as a response to a specific tactical problem became a symbol of American innovation and adaptability. The modified bombers, with their clusters of forward-firing guns, represented more than just an engineering solution. They embodied the principle that no challenge is insurmountable, no problem unsolvable, if people are willing to think creatively and act decisively. This historical account serves as a reminder that technological advancement, when combined with human courage and ingenuity, can transform the course of events. The innovation demonstrated in the Pacific Theater during this era shows how creative problem-solving and the willingness to challenge conventional approaches can lead to breakthrough solutions that save lives and achieve objectives previously thought impossible. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Do not forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.